Think of Scripture like the engine of a perfect car. It might be flawless, it's powerful, precisely engineered, but what happens if you have that perfect engine sitting in your driveway without wheels or a steering wheel? Exactly, it's not going anywhere. It's perfect, might be perfect as an engine, sure, but it's incomplete as a vehicle. To make it fully functional, you need wheels and steering. Scripture alone is very similar to this analogy. Even though it's divinely inspired and perfect as a text, it can't fully operate as a standalone authority system. Why is that? Well, because a text, no matter how perfect, doesn't interpret itself. It requires readers, and readers inevitably bring misunderstandings, biases, and disagreements. And that's precisely why Protestantism splintered into thousands of denominations, as we've already shown.
All right, we've already got some claims from Cameron here that unfortunately they don't stand up because Cameron himself just said, well, Scripture has readers. Has fallible readers. And who are those readers, Cameron? And if they are, say, bishops of the churches, are those bishops of the churches fallible or infallible? Because they're readers of the text. So we've already got a problem with argument 3 here. He claims Scripture alone is imperfect because, and we need some larger system, and we know that a text requires interpreters, and interpreters are fallen. They are fallible. I'm with you, man. I totally agree with you that interpreters are fallible. Great. We're in agreement there. Let's see if you'll be consistent on this point, though.
Now, Protestants initially chose Scripture alone because they thought that tradition and the magisterium introduced error. But let's separate these two ideas very clearly. One, the possibility of error introduced by tradition and the magisterium. Catholics obviously deny that this occurred. 2, whether a system that includes Scripture, tradition, and the magisterium, let's call that STM, is in principle superior to Scripture alone. Our argument here, in argument number 3, is strictly about this second idea. STM is a fundamentally superior system, not just practically, but in principle.
Okay, now this argument he's making is actually a little muddy, because as a Protestant, I can agree with what he's written here, that Scripture plus tradition and a teaching authority is good. It's better than only solo Scripture, right? Scripture as the only authority, period. Again, we're not seeing the relevant, important, highly important distinction that is a part of this conversation. This argument he's presenting with point 2 here does not explicitly state whether a system that includes infallible Scripture, infallible tradition, and infallible magisterium. Because if you were to make that point, maybe we'll call that 2* or point 3, that's a different point than one that says a system of infallibility of Scripture, authority of tradition, and authority of a teaching group, a magisterium type. We wouldn't call it magisterium because people might get confused with Roman Catholic magisterium, right? But the point is here, once again, Cameron's point fails to implement the relevant distinction about the infallibility of the authority. He's attacking a straw man once again, as if Protestants think Scripture is the only authority. And Cameron should know better because the definition he gave at the start of the video was that Scripture's the only infallible authority. But here with argument 3, like with the other arguments, we don't have that relevant distinction. So he's attacking, once again, a straw man. This is not, what he's presenting here is not a critique against Sola Scriptura. But let's continue with it. Let's indulge him.
See why I consider a helpful analogy from debates about God's existence. Atheists often argue that the universe is the ultimate stopping point of explanation because it's simpler and observable. But that stopping point is imperfect because the universe itself still requires an outside explanation. In contrast, God as a stopping point is perfect, self-sufficient, and complete. Likewise, Scripture alone as a stopping point for authority is imperfect because it requires interpretation.
Notice here, he says it explicitly, the straw man. Scripture alone as an authority. He doesn't talk about infallible authority. I'll replay this. You're going to hear it, how he fails to make this relevant distinction.
Stopping point is perfect, self-sufficient, and complete. Likewise, Scripture alone as a stopping point for authority is imperfect because it
There you go. Scripture alone as a stopping point for authority. That's not Sola Scriptura. Sola Scriptura is Scripture alone is as the only infallible authority. Yes, we can have other authorities like tradition, like a teaching group. So again, I know I'm beating a dead horse at this point early on here. Cameron's Argument 3 doesn't work. I'm still waiting 7 arguments in for an argument against Sola Scriptura, and yet we don't have it from Cameron. I do have Bro Cephas on YouTube here commenting. He asked if I am baked. Are you baked? No, maybe it's just the light color of my blue eyes. I did have Taco Bell for lunch. I don't know if that's... Here's some proof of that. Still have some Dr. Pepper. So definitely not baked, not even half baked. But I do love some Taco Bell, as I've had on the show before. Okay, we've got Amateur Knight. Yeah, he's responding to Bro Cephas. We made the Bible for the Eucharist and liturgy and to tell the story of the Catholic Church. Amateur Knight says, we? Yes, exactly. This is part of the debate, classical debate. Again, John Calvin argues that the Reformation is the recovery of church tradition, church teaching. So that's the question, is what tradition went awry? That's ultimately the question. And some tradition did clearly go awry, and someone has to pick which tradition they think went awry.